There's this weird thing that happens somewhere between having a little bit of money saved and having a lot of money saved. It's not about the number itself. It's about something that changes inside you that you can't quite explain to people who haven't experienced it. Someone with $5,000 in savings makes different decisions than someone with $500. That makes sense. But someone with $50,000 saved doesn't just make different decisions than someone with $5,000. They think differently. They see opportunities differently. They move through the world differently. And the strangest part is that this transformation happens so gradually that you don't notice it while it's happening. You just wake up one day and realize you're not the same person who started saving years ago. My name is Nick, and I've watched enough people go through different savings milestones to recognize patterns that nobody really talks about. There are specific thresholds where something fundamental shifts, and understanding these shifts might explain why you feel stuck or why you're finally starting to feel like you're getting somewhere. Hit that subscribe button because we're about to break down exactly what changes at each level and why the journey from $5,000 to $50,000 isn't just about accumulating money. Let's start with what $5,000 actually represents, because most people misunderstand this completely. $5,000 isn't wealth. It's not even close to what you'll eventually need for retirement or financial independence. But it's something way more important than that. It's proof. Proof that you can delay gratification. Proof that you can make a plan and stick to it. Proof that money doesn't have to disappear the moment it hits your account. For someone who's been living paycheck to paycheck their entire adult life, having $5,000 sitting in an account they don't touch is a psychological breakthrough that's almost impossible to overstate. Think about what it takes to get to $5,000 when you're starting from zero. If you can save $500 a month, that's 10 months of choosing not to spend money you could have spent. 10 months of saying no to things you wanted. 10 months of watching that balance creep up painfully slowly while your friends are living like they don't have a care in the world. Most people quit somewhere around month 3 or 4 because the sacrifice feels disproportionate to the results. The ones who make it to $5,000 have developed something that can't be bought or taught. They've rewired their relationship with money. But here's what that $5,000 actually does in practical terms. Your car breaks down and needs a $1-200 repair. With zero savings, that's a crisis. You're scrambling, putting it on a credit card at 22% interest, borrowing from family, maybe even considering one of those predatory payday loans. You're losing sleep, stressed about how this is going to cascade into other problems. With $5,000 in savings, it's annoying, but it's not a crisis. You pay for the repair, your savings drops to $3,800, and then you build it back up over the next few months. The exact same problem that would have spiraled into a multi-month disaster is now just an inconvenience. That's the first shift that happens at $5,000. Emergencies stop being emergencies. They become expenses. Uncomfortable, unwanted expenses, but manageable ones. Your brain stops running constant disaster scenarios because you finally have a buffer between you and chaos. That background anxiety that you didn't even realize was there, that low-level panic about what happens if something goes wrong, it quiets down. Not completely, but enough that you can think about something other than just surviving until your next paycheck. The decision-making quality improves too, and this is subtle, but massive. When you're at zero savings, every decision is made from desperation. You take the job that's available right now because you need the money immediately. You can't afford to wait for something better. You buy the cheapest option, even when you know it'll break and cost more long-term, because you literally don't have the money for the better option right now. Your entire life is optimized for surviving today at the expense of tomorrow. With $5,000 saved, you start being able to make strategic decisions instead of just survival decisions. You can quit the terrible job and take 2 weeks to find something better because you have enough runway to cover that gap. You can buy the decent work boots that cost $120 instead of the $40 ones that'll fall apart in 3 months. You can invest in yourself. Take the online course, get the certification, buy the tools you need. Those opportunities were always there, but you couldn't access them without a financial buffer. There's someone who saved their first $5,000 working a job that paid $42,000 annually. It took about a year of aggressive saving, living with roommates, driving a car that should have been retired years ago, eating the same basic meals on repeat. Once they hit $5,000, they used some of it to take a 2-week coding boot camp. That boot camp led to a job paying $65,000. The $5,000 didn't make them rich, but it gave them options they didn't have before, and those options led to income growth that accelerated everything else. Now let's talk about the psychological trap that catches a lot of people right around $5,000 to $10,000. You've been grinding, making sacrifices, being disciplined, and you finally have some real money saved. Then your brain starts doing this thing where it tells you that you've made it. You've got $8,000 in the bank. You've never had this much money in your life. Surely you deserve to celebrate a little bit. Maybe upgrade that car. Maybe take a nice vacation. Maybe finally get that thing you've been wanting for years. This is where a lot of wealth building journeys end. Someone gets to $7,000 or $8,000, feels like they've achieved something significant, and then they celebrate by spending $4,000 on something that feels justified in the moment. Now they're back down to $3,000, and psychologically they're starting over. Except this time it's harder because they already did the hard part once, and they're not excited about doing it again. The people who break through this trap understand something crucial. $5,000 isn't the destination. It's the foundation for everything else. It's the launch pad, not the landing spot. Once you've proven you can save $5,000, the question becomes, can you do it again while still having the first $5,000? Can you get to $10,000, then $15,000, then $20,000? Because that's where things start getting really interesting. Somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000, there's another shift. You're not just handling emergencies anymore. You're starting to have choices about your life. Job offer in another city that would be great for your career, but requires moving costs? You can do it. Opportunity to invest in yourself that costs a few $1,000s? You can afford it. 6 months of living expenses if you lose your job? You're getting close. This level of savings isn't just a buffer, it's starting to become actual freedom. But the real transformation happens between $20,000 and $50,000. And this is where people who've never had significant savings simply cannot understand what changes. It's not just about having more money. Something fundamental shifts in how you see the world and your place in it. At $50,000, you're not thinking about surviving anymore. You're thinking about optimizing. You're not worried about whether you can handle an emergency. You're thinking about how to make your money grow faster. The fear that dominated your thinking when you had $5,000 has been replaced by something closer to confidence. Not arrogance, not recklessness, just this quiet assurance that you're going to be okay no matter what happens. The risk tolerance changes completely. With $5,000 saved, taking any kind of career risk feels terrifying because that $5,000 is your entire safety net. Lose it and you're back to zero. But with $50,000, you can afford to take calculated risks. You can leave the stable job for the startup that might fail, but could also be amazing for your career. You can start that business you've been thinking about. You can negotiate aggressively for raises because you're not desperate. The money gives you leverage that changes every negotiation in your life. There's a case that illustrates this perfectly. Someone working in corporate marketing was miserable, making $78,000 a year doing work they hated. They wanted to pivot into freelance consulting, but were terrified of giving up the stable paycheck. When they had $12,000 saved, they couldn't do it. That felt like maybe 3 months of expenses if things went badly. But they kept saving, kept grinding. And when they hit $45,000 in savings, something clicked. That was enough to cover a year of basic expenses if absolutely everything went wrong. So they quit, went freelance, and within 2 years were making $140,000 annually, doing work they actually enjoyed. The $45,000 didn't make them wealthy, but it gave them permission to bet on themselves. The relationship with work transforms entirely. When you're at zero savings, your job owns you. You tolerate whatever they throw at you because you need that paycheck like you need oxygen. At $5,000, you're still pretty dependent, but at least you could survive for a month if you had to quit. At $50,000, you're not owned by anyone. You're choosing to work there, and you can choose differently if circumstances change. That psychological shift affects everything from how you interact with your boss to how you advocate for yourself to whether you're willing to walk away from toxic situations. The spending psychology flips completely too, and this is counterintuitive. You'd think having more money would make you spend more freely, but it often goes the opposite direction. When you're at $5,000, spending money feels risky because every dollar could be the difference between handling an emergency and catastrophe. So you might actually spend somewhat freely because you're already close to the edge anyway. What's the difference between $5,000 and $4,700? But at $50,000, every dollar you spend is a dollar that's not compounding. You understand now what took years to build. You've watched compound interest start to work in your favor. You've seen your investments grow by thousands of dollars in a good month. Suddenly you're way more protective of your money because you understand its potential. That $100 dinner isn't just $100. It's $100 that won't turn into $450 over the next 20 years. The math changes how you see spending. People with $50,000 saved develop this interesting quirk where they'll agonize over small daily expenses, but won't hesitate to spend large amounts on things that actually matter. They'll pack lunch to save $12, but drop $3,000 on a professional certification without blinking. They've learned to distinguish between spending that depletes wealth and spending that builds it, and they're ruthless about cutting the former while embracing the latter. The time horizon extends dramatically. At $5,000, you're thinking about the next few months. At $50,000, you're thinking in years and decades. You're not just trying to survive the present, you're actively building a future. That changes what you're willing to do today. The sacrifice feels different when you're working toward a 10-year vision instead of just trying to make it to next month. Here's something that happens around $50,000 that nobody talks about. Your peer group starts to shift. Not because you're trying to ditch your old friends, but because your priorities have changed so much that you naturally gravitate toward people who are thinking about money the same way you are. Conversations about financial goals and investment strategies that would have been boring or irrelevant when you had $5,000 are suddenly fascinating because you're dealing with those questions yourself. This can create tension. Friends who are still living paycheck to paycheck might not understand why you won't join them for expensive dinners or weekend trips anymore. They might think you've gotten cheap or that you think you're better than them now. But it's not about superiority. It's about being at different stages of a journey. You remember what it was like at $5,000. Hell, You remember what it was like at zero. But you're playing a different game now, and it's hard to explain that to people who aren't there yet. The confidence that comes with $50,000 is visceral and impossible to fake. You walk into salary negotiations differently. You make career decisions differently. You don't tolerate disrespect or bad treatment because you don't have to. There's this quiet power that comes from knowing you could walk away from anything that's not serving you, and people can sense that even if they don't know your financial situation. But here's what's really interesting. The journey from $5,000 to $50,000 is harder than the journey from $50,000 to $500,000. Not because the amount is smaller, but because the habits and psychology you develop getting to $50,000 are the exact same habits that'll carry you to $500,000 and beyond. The hard part is the transformation from someone who can't save to someone who can. Once you've made that transformation, the rest is just time and consistency. Getting from zero to $5,000 might take you a year or two of intense focus and sacrifice. Getting from $5,000 to $50,000 might take another 5 to 8 years, depending on your income and savings rate. But here's the thing. Those years are going to pass, whether you're building wealth or not. The question is whether you'll be a different person at the end of them. The $5,000 proves you can do it. The $50,000 proves you can sustain it. And sustaining it changes you in ways that money itself never could. You become someone who delays gratification, someone who makes long-term decisions, someone who sees opportunities where others see obstacles, someone who has options instead of just obligations. The money is just numbers in an account. The person you become, building it, is the real transformation. So if you're at $5,000 right now, understand that you've already done the hardest part. You've proven you're not like most people. You've developed the discipline that most people never develop. The journey to $50,000 is just doing what you've already proven you can do, but longer. And if you're still at zero, looking at these numbers thinking they're impossibly far away, remember that everyone who's at $50,000 started exactly where you are. They just started walking and didn't stop. That's the only difference. The transformation from $5,000 to $50,000 isn't really about the money at all. It's about becoming the kind of person who builds wealth instead of just survives. And that person, they're unstoppable.